or at least the fruits of those ambitions and intelligence and good luck do not belong to you. They are, again, they are somewhat arbitrary as a result of upbringing and genetics. They're not yours or mine in any strong sense of the term, but rather a collective possession that can be or should be distributed, the fruits of which distributed to society as a whole. Consider the following passage from Rawls. The difference principle, he writes, represents, in effect, an agreement to regard the distribution of natural talents as a common asset and to share in the benefits of this distribution, whatever it turns out to be. Whatever it turns out to be. Your intelligence or your drive or your endowments are again what he calls a collective asset. Think about that. And it is this conception of common assets that underwrites Rawls's theory of distributive justice and the welfare state, just as Locke's theory of self-ownership justifies his conception of limited government and the constitutional state. According to Rawls, again, justice requires that social arrangements be structured for the benefits of the least advantaged in the genetic lottery of society. His thought experiment that he calls the original condition specifies that nobody would know in advance in this condition what their particular endowment intellectually, in many other ways, would be. Therefore, every individual would, in contracting with the whole, would agree to share equally in the benefits of this, as it were, genetic lottery. So redistributing our common assets does not violate, on Rawls's account, the sanctity of the individual, because, again, the fruits of our labor were never really ours to begin with. Unlike Locke, whose theory of self-ownership provides a moral justification for the individual, for the self, for our moral personality, Rawls's difference principle maintains that we never again belong to ourselves at all. We never really have ownership in ourselves, but are always part of a larger social we, a social collective, a collective consciousness whose common assets can be redistributed for the benefit of the whole. Locke and Rawls, the point I'm trying to make is they represent two radically different visions of the liberal state. One broadly libertarian, the other broadly welfarist. One emphasizing liberty, the other emphasizing equality. Interestingly, again, this transition, this evolution represents a change which has gone on within, in many ways, the liberal tradition itself. Unlike some of these other critics, Rawls does not come to be claiming from a tradition outside of liberalism, but to be developing certain arguments from within the liberal tradition, and yet has moved in a way clearly very different from its Lockean formulation. Both of these views, again, they begin from common premises, but move in very different directions. Locke's theory of self-ownership regards the political community in largely negative terms, as protecting our antecedent individual selves and individual rights. Rawls's theory of common assets regards the community in a far more positive sense as taking an active role in reshaping and redistributing the products of our individual endeavors for the common interests. The question for you, just like the question for any of us, is which of these two views is more valid, or which of the two strikes you as more powerful or plausible. My own view, and I loathe to editorialize, but my own view is far closer to American theory, to Locke's theory, which I think, than Rawls. The Declaration of Independence, the Charter of American Liberty, states that each individual is endowed with unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. The very indeterminacy of the last phrase, the pursuit of happiness, with its emphasis upon the individual's right to determine happiness for themselves, suggests a form of government that allows for ample diversity for our natural talents and abilities. And although the Declaration certainly intends that the establishment of justice is one of the first tasks of government, nowhere does it imply that this requires the wholesale redistribution of our individual goods and assets. And second, although Rawls is clearly attentive to the moral ills of inequality, and we will turn to that problem emphatically on Wednesday when we look at Jean-Jacques Rousseau's essay on inequality. There has never been a more powerful, passionate, and persuasive critic of the ills of inequality than Jean-Jacques Rousseau. But while Rawls is certainly attentive to the moral ills of inequality, he seems very naive about the mechanisms, the actual political mechanisms by which inequalities will be rectified. Rawls wants government to work for the benefit of the least advantaged, but this will require the extensive and often arbitrary use of judicial power to determine who has a right to what, far in excess of the powers of the court. The result would be, I think, if we follow Rawls's teachings to their letter, the result would be not a class of philosopher kings, but rather a class of chief justices endowed with the power to rearrange and redistribute our collective assets for the sake of achieving the maximum degree of social equality. It is no surprise that the warmest reception that Rawls's writing gets today is in the schools of law, is in the law schools, where he has had an enormous influence on shaping the education of the current and the next generation of lawyers, judges, and possibly chief justices who may be looking to, looking not to the Constitution, but to Rawls's theory of justice as a litmus or a tool for bringing about a social redistribution. So I leave you on that sobering note. But a return to Locke, such as it is, even if such a return were possible, is by no means a panacea to what ails us. I am not suggesting for a moment that Locke is some kind of cure-all. Some historians, let me just mention again, Louis Hartz was but the most famous, treat America as a nation uniquely built upon Lockean foundations. America, he believed, remained something of a Lockean remnant, remnant, fossil in some ways, in a world increasingly governed by more radical forms of modernity. In fact, it has been our sort of stubborn Lockeanism that has, in many ways, prevented the kinds of extreme ideological polarization and conflict that one sees throughout much of the 19th and 20th centuries. But Locke's effort to build a kind of modern republican government on the low but solid foundations of self-interest and self-ownership and the desire for comfortable preservation could not help but generate its own forms of dissatisfaction. Can a regime dedicated to the pursuit of happiness or to the protection of property ever satisfy the deepest longings of the human soul? Can a regime devoted to the rational accumulation of property answer those higher order needs or higher order virtues like honor, nobility, and sacrifice? Can a regime devoted to the avoidance of pain, discomfort, and anxiety produce anything more than contemporary forms of Epicureanism and nihilism? In any case, I'm suggesting, no more than any other land could America insulate itself from the great heights as well as the great depths of later forms of modernity. America, as a former teacher of mine once said, is the land where the many facets, the many faces of modernity are working themselves out. We are but a moment in the kind of comprehensive self-dissatisfaction that is modernity. So that a return to Lockeanism in many ways is not so much a cure for the pathologies of modernity. I would suggest that those pathologies are themselves already rooted in the pathologies of Locke. I will end on that sober note and encourage you to take Rousseau's advice about loving one's country seriously on Tuesday.